Hello, my friend, and welcome back. Today, I thought we'd do something a little different. I have a couple mysterious stories I'd like to share with you. So grab a warm drink, pull up a chair, and get cozy. I'm going to be reading from the book Bigfoot Lives in Idaho by Becky Cook. It's a compilation of what are believed to be Bigfoot encounters. I'll read the accounts all the way through and leave it up to you to draw your own conclusions. Our first encounter takes place in Loon Lake, Idaho, and was experienced by two friends going on a day hike. I'll read each of their accounts separately to give us a bigger picture of the events that unfolded on that day in July of 2009. In northern Idaho, there is a lake called Loon Lake near McCall in the Payette National Forest, where a plane crash landed many years ago. The wreckage is still up there in some beautiful hiking country, and it was there that Rob Bizzuto and his friend Tori headed on a warm July day. We had been planning this trip a long time, Bizzuto said. I had been there several times myself alone, then the one time I take a friend, I got lost. They hiked up and around the lake, arriving there at roughly 3 p.m. They had lunch and they messed around a bit, and finally decided it was time to head back to where they had parked the car. They started down the trail and had gone quite a ways when they came to the trailhead marking, and it was there that they made a wrong turn. I pretty much knew where I was the whole time, Bizzuto said. I kept saying we needed to turn around, but Tori didn't want to. They continued down the all-terrain four-wheeler track, thinking it would connect back to the right trail to get down the mountain. But it just kept going and going. They figured they shouldn't split up, and after a while ended up on a path that would have led them into Chinook Creek campground. It was about then that they heard the first scream. By then it was about 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, and the sound seemed very much like a siren, very loud and close to where they were. I find it hard to believe someone was sitting off to the side of the trail making this kind of sound late at night, Bizzuto said, especially when we didn't see anyone else out there. By then, he was convinced that they were way off course, and he didn't want to be trying to find his way in the coming darkness, so they chose to camp on the trail. They weren't prepared at all, didn't have any food with them, and he was wearing a short-sleeved shirt with no jacket. Chadwick only had on a tank top, and they were getting cold. Luckily, Bizzuto found some matches in his pack that he used to make a fire. I don't usually carry my pack, he said. It's a good thing I did. They made a small fire just enough to keep warm, and they decided that one of them would have to stay awake to keep the fire going throughout the night. Along about midnight, Bizzuto was lying with his head on his pack when he felt the eerie sensation that something was out there, near their fire, watching them. There, to the left of the fire, about 40 feet away on the hillside, was a pair of yellow eyes. They watched them, and Bizzuto could see them blink. At one point, he saw a flash of red, just for a second, and then it was gone. Bizzuto asked his friend if he saw that, but Chadwick was sitting with his back to the area and didn't see anything. The illusion of something tall watching them from the trees remained all night. Bizzuto had the impression that it was very tall, possibly over 7 feet tall, from the height of the eyes watching them. Neither of the two slept well that night, and they were both ready to move early in the morning. They looked around for tracks in the area they saw the eyes, but the ground was too hard for any tracks. By about 6, they were on the trail back up the mountain towards the trailhead to figure out which path would take them back to their vehicle. All along the way, he thought they were being followed. I kept asking myself, is this really happening? Bizzuto said. I didn't want to provoke whatever it was, and I was so tired all I really wanted to do was get back to the car. Neither of them wanted to split up, but Bizzuto was pretty tired by then, so eventually Chadwick went ahead of him and found someone who could help them get off the mountain and headed back to Boise. Bizzuto said he hasn't gone back up there again, but they talk about what happened all the time. It was definitely a hair-raising experience, he said. That concludes the story of our first encounter. Now we'll move on to Rob Bizzuto's friend, Tori Chadwick, and see what he has to say about the same event. Tori Chadwick wanted to go hike up by Loon Lake a long time before he and Rob Bizzuto actually went there. He had heard about the old plane wreckage, and the fact that it was a beautiful hike just added to the appeal. So it was with excitement that they set off on a summer Saturday for what should have been a fairly easy one-day hike. They drove up early on Saturday morning and made it to the beginning of the trailhead about 10:30, and from there began their hike, arriving at the lake about 3 o'clock, where they had their lunch. We messed around a bit once we got there, Chadwick said. We weren't in a hurry to head back. When they finally started back down the trail, there's a point where 5 trails converge, and they didn't see that when going up the trail while they had their eyes on the lake ahead of them. But coming down, they took the wrong trail, and they didn't realize it. In fact, they had already been on the trail at least 2 hours before they became concerned. They made a course correction onto an all-terrain trail, thinking it would take them back where they needed to be, and after some time, a motorcycle passed them. They stopped the rider and asked directions, and it was then that they found out they were pretty far off course. They made another course adjustment, heading back up the trail, back towards the lake, and before too long, they both heard a loud siren-like sound coming from the woods near them. Chadwick said that it was very loud and shrill, sounding like the type of siren that is used for tornado warnings. They looked at each other and asked, "What was that?" But since it didn't sound like anything either of them had ever heard, they didn't have an answer. They were still trying to get back to where they had started, but it was getting dark, so they made plans to spend the night on the trail. Chadwick said he was feeling really stressed and was concerned that no one knew where they had been headed. He was due back at work the next day at 3 in the afternoon, and he wasn't sure when they were going to get off the mountain. Besides that, he was only wearing a tank top, had no jacket, and it was getting cold. Thankfully, Bizzuto found some matches in the bottom of his pack, so they made a little fire and determined that one of them should stay awake all night to keep the fire going. Chadwick said that he kept hearing movement in the bushes around them, and he knew that something was out there, watching them. It circled around them several times, and he continued hearing it every few minutes. When Bizzuto saw the flash of red, he had his back to the area, but they both saw the eyes watching them. "It wasn't hurting us," Chadwick said. "It just seemed to be observing us." He said he didn't think it felt threatened, so it left them alone. They got what sleep they could, and early the next morning, they put the fire out and went looking for tracks, but didn't find any. They started down the trail together, but Bizzuto was exhausted and was lagging behind a bit. Ahead of him, Chadwick said he could hear what he thought might be kids playing in the creek or something. It was close, or at least it seemed to be. Maybe 15 or 20 feet off the trail. But he ruled that out because it was barely getting light by then. They hadn't passed anyone in a while with or without kids, and it just seemed too improbable to have kids playing that high up in the woods. Then he said he started to hear a lot of noises coming from the side of the trail. It sounded awful, like a horrible, sick bird call. "I've heard moose and elk calls on TV, and it didn't sound anything like either of those," he said. He stopped and waited for Bizzuto, and they both listened to see if they could identify the sound. They talked about it for a bit and then just kept going. Then he heard a low, warning growl. It sounded like a stay away type growl. Just down the river from where they were, Chadwick said. They still couldn't see what was making the sound, and he really wanted to get back home, so they just pushed onward down the mountain, Bozzuto lagging behind a little more. It was about then that Chadwick saw something with long brownish legs run over a log to the side of them. It was definitely too tall to have been a child playing tricks on them. It was getting lighter, so I could see it pretty well, he said. It was only about 25 feet away from me. He said he stood there and watched the area where he saw it, but figured it must have known he was there and held still because nothing moved. They must really have great camouflage skills because I watched and I couldn't see anything. Either that or he was holding very still. Eventually, Chadwick found a campsite with a camper parked there, and he approached the man there and asked for help getting off the mountain. It was then that they found out they were over 10 miles from where their car was parked. The man from the camper went back up the hill and found Bozzuto, and they were returned to their vehicle. Chadwick said he realizes now how blessed they were not to have had anything worse happen to them, and they really should have been better prepared for their hike, but he was really glad it ended well. It was a night I will never forget, said Chadwick. It was stressful, but not really scary, and I will never forget it for the rest of my life. And that concludes our final story for tonight's encounters. What do you think they saw out there in the woods? Do you believe in Bigfoot? Or something else? I'd love to hear your theories or stories, or maybe possible encounters you've had. Please leave them down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and let me know if you'd like to see more episodes like this in the future. For now, I'm signing off.